Hello and welcome to another episode of the Classical Republican. Today we're talking about an issue in the Times News opinion by Jim Jones, who's a former Supreme Court Justice here in Idaho. It says, "We should heed George Washington's warning against partisanship." And I'm going to read a lot of this. He says, in his farewell address, which was first published on September 19th, 1796, Washington warned that political parties can, quote, become potent engines by which cunning ambitions and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, end quote. He goes on to quote, and I have another video coming out about George Washington and his classical republicanism. And this is a very classically Republican issue. So to oppose faction is something that that republics have tried to do, and it's sort of at the essence of classical republicanism. You're supposed to be able to channel those different factions into different institutions. So the ancient Greeks had the vuli, which was a little bit more oligarchical, and then an oligarchical council, and then you also had the ecclesia, which was the assembly, which was the mass of people. So you had people who were poor, and their interests were being, the majority of people in most societies are poor, in ancient times anyway. Hopefully that changes. Hopefully we're living in a time when the majority of people are not poor. So he goes on to say, this is Jim Jones, he says, it is uncanny that America's founding father could have predicted how extreme partisanship would have brought us to these ugly times, where blind party loyalty trumps the public good, even to the point of insurrection. The American people are faced with a stark choice: continue down the road where political extremism rules our lives, or choose to put the good of the country and state above poisonous partisanship. Now, I want to point out that George Washington was talking about political parties. Like, you shouldn't have political parties. That's what he was saying, because the Democratic Republicans of Jefferson and Madison were the opposition to the administration, and the administration changed into the Federalist Party. I believe George Washington did become a member at the very end, but he really didn't like it. He didn't think it was a good trend, and it was anti-Republican, anti-classical Republican. Okay, so Jim Jones is making this really good point that, reminding us that we shouldn't be so partisan, and then he gets into this. So what he says: the next opportunity to choose between chronic governmental dysfunction and responsible, pragmatic governing is May 17th, Idaho's primary election day. Being a one-party state where the selection of most office holders will occur in the Republican primary, those not registered as Republican voters by March 11th will have no say as to the character and direction of our government. So we used to have same-day or election day registration, and we no longer have that for the Republican Party, which is the only game in town, honestly, if you're going to be honest about it. Yeah, that's how Idaho is. That's how most states in the United States of America are today. You only have a few states where you have really viable alternatives to the party that's the majority currently. In most states, you have one party, and you have the other party, but you have the opposing party, but can they really do anything? No, they cannot. And then, of course, you have third parties, but that's even more. I don't want to say it's a waste of time, but it's less effective under these circumstances. I'm not saying third parties are always less effective. I do believe they serve their purpose. They do serve a good purpose of promoting issues, but really, when you have a state that has one party, and the other party doesn't even count, then you have, I mean, really, there's no point in having a third party in those circumstances. Now let's go on. Just 2 sample races. Okay, so here he compares 2 candidates to their opponents, and shows that, one group is really responsible, the other group is rather irresponsible. So you have the establishment Republicans, and then you have the far right. And so I think what he's pointing out here is that you have a group of people in the establishment Republicans here in Idaho who have borne the burden of governance, and that is something that they're not pushing an agenda. I mean, sure, they have an agenda. Everybody has an agenda, but they're also looking for solutions to problems, and they have a good record of finding solutions to problems, and so they deserve. And so what he's arguing, that they deserve to be elected. Okay, so I mean, a lot of these people mentions Lori Likely, and who's the other one here? Senator Jim Woodward. So those people, even before they were elected to the State House, they did serve on other boards, commissions, committees, and so they did have a track record of being effective deliberators and finding solutions to local problems, even before they went to the State House. So let's continue. Idaho's almost 310,000 independent voters, who comprise 35% of total Idaho voters 2 years ago, would have no say in the selection between these types of candidates if highly partisan Republicans have their way. The House approved legislation on President's Day to prevent independent voters from registering in the Republican primary after March 11th. They have always had until Election Day to make that choice. Okay, so he's using numbers from 2 years ago, and that's probably the best numbers he has, but there has been an increase in Republican Party registration over the last, probably decade, because they closed the primary, and I think there was a delay, but eventually, over time, more and more people decided to register Republican rather than being independent, or even registering for another party, because they wanted to have a say in who was going to be their next public official. So let's go on. From the time I first became eligible to vote in Idaho in the early 1960s, any voter could go into the polls on Election Day and vote the ballot of any party with candidates up for election. The open primary served us well, producing reasonable, responsible officials. A decade ago, GOP zealots closed the Republican primary to ensure the election of most extreme candidates. It has worked beyond their wildest dreams, producing some of the most divisive, dysfunctional legislatures in the state's history. George Washington, and now he goes back to, George Washington, and I think he's kind of lost the... it's a little disingenuous to say, we shouldn't have parties, but then you're saying, we're going to have... You should definitely vote in the party primary and have a party, vote for my side of that faction of a party, and he's going to, So I think it's a little disingenuous to be quoting George Washington here, but let's go on. George Washington would have been appalled by the tight grip that GOP extremists have on the selection of public officials in Idaho. All taxpayers pay for the Republican primary, and they all should have the opportunity to participate in selecting our leaders. House Bill 439, which would prevent independents from participating after March 11th, should be defeated in the Senate or vetoed. That would be a giant step toward following Washington's sound advice and depoliticizing the poisonous politics that have plagued our great state for the last decade. Just play it safe, though. Each and every person who wants to have a vote in the future direction of our state should contact their county clerk's office to register in the Republican primary before the March 11 date. So, yeah, I do agree. Definitely register to vote before March 11th. And if you really want to vote for somebody who's actually going to be able to take office, vote in the Republican primary. Okay. Yeah, so the Republicans also had a resolution at the winter meeting here in 2022. Or was it 20? In winter. And they what they wanted to do was to make it so that Republicans could not run as Republicans if they were not approved by the county central committee. Okay, and some of the county central committees have been basically taken over by the far right, and so that would ensure that either factions would be able to get their candidate in. So and I believe for statewide office, they had to have approval from their state or from their local county, the county that they're from. So that's a little, but that did not pass. So as you saw from my my previous video on political parties, living in a one-party state can be a good thing. Well, it can be a workable thing. It's not an ideal thing. It can be, it can be, I guess, a good thing as long as it works out that there are other institutions that can push back on the party. And so I think that's what we have here in Idaho and many other states. It's not like a totalitarian state which has a party, and the party is the only thing that matters. You have the head of state, who is also the party chair, and the president, and the head of the military, and so that is not a good version of a one-party state. But when you have a one-party state, and that's it's just one of many institutions. We still have a functioning legislature and an executive branch that still contains institutional pride. I think that has to be the measure of the mark there. As long as you still have institutional pride, they are able to fend off domination from the party, and that's a good thing. Okay. Now, what I want to say as a classical Republican is that if Jim Jones really wanted to take George Washington's warning against partisanship so seriously, he would promote the Venetian ballot and therefore prevent factions from taking control. Long live the Republic.